Hello, and thank you for joining. Today's session on Learning Views is a very special session for us because it's dedicated to and exclusively for our Training Pros consultants. Learning Views is in partnership with Training Pros and Harrisburg University, which has a wonderful instructional design and instructional technology program. And today's session is really going to be an opportunity to give back to our community and to give back to our consultants who are so instrumental in our success and in our ability to serve our clients. I invite you for the next 60 minutes to monotask, to turn off the rest of the world, to turn off the rest of your devices, and allow yourself the opportunity to really enjoy this session from Brenda. I want to say just a few words to get us started, and then the majority of our time will be Brenda really helping us in understanding mindfulness, what it is, why it's important, and how we can use those practices of mindfulness in our daily lives immediately. So this is me. I'm Cheryl Manning. I'm a relationship manager with Training Pros, and like many of my relationship manager peers, started as an instructional designer. So I was an instructional design manager at Accenture, running large custom training project teams. And from that, I spent a number of years in account executive positions in leadership and development. And I've been with Training Pros for 8 years. I live in Florida, and I work mostly with clients in the Southeast. And I have the privilege of being able to work with many of you that are on the call with us today. We believe that it should be easy for great consultants to find quality assignments. We understand how much effort it takes to find a good project because we've been there, which is why we work with hundreds of companies across the U.S. to put great consultants to work. Our consultants are really a mix of a lot of different specialties, anything from training design, development, delivery in any kind of modality, organizational change, technical communications, and many of the specialties that you see here. Learning Views is really a combination of Training Pros and Harrisburg University. It's part of our giving back to the community process, and we believe it's important to give back best practices, trends that are in the industry, and today is really about you. So Brenda and I had actually planned a session on mindfulness last year, and we were able to deliver that earlier for our clients, and all of that was really actually pre-COVID-19. And Stacy Piccolo, who's one of our operations managers at Training Pros and kind of a no hill too high to climb kind of gal, suggested that we create a session just for you. We recognize that whether we're working or we're not working, or we're working and trying to homeschool, or we're trying to balance the partner relationships, or whatever might be happening, that today might be a challenging time. So today is really a gift back to you, and it's a gift because we've been able to work with Brenda. So let me just tell you just a moment about Brenda as well. So Brenda is a facilitator. She's an executive coach. She's a consultant who really has been practicing mindfulness for a number of years. She has developed very innovative programs in leadership development for companies like Tiffany's and Foot Locker. She works with individuals, she works with teams, and she works with organizations to be able to help them to be successful. And she's soon to be passing her certification as a mindfulness workplace facilitator. We know that that stress is a large part of what we deal with in our lives and in our jobs. And we know that companies like Apple, Google, Nike have been using mindfulness as a way of adding focus, adding clarity, and adding enhanced productivity and performance. So Brenda's going to be able to talk with us about how to make this work within our lives today. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brenda.
Hello. Thank you so much, Cheryl, for that introduction. It's great to be here with you all today. And it's interesting, when you and I first started talking about doing this webinar, COVID-19 wasn't on anybody's radar. And it's amazing how quickly our world has changed in just 2 months. And as consultants, how we're all adapting to a new normal. All right, so before we dive in, I'd like to lead us into this webinar with a mindful breathing exercise. So, wherever you are right now, I invite you to just settle in, sit up straight but relaxed, and for this exercise, you can keep your eyes open. Start to relax and soften the muscles in your face, your jaw, your shoulders, and allow yourself to let go of what you were doing right before this and any sense of urgency you may have about what comes after this. Breathe a bit more deeply than normal, but not so it feels unnatural. And as thoughts surface, and they will, just acknowledge them and visualize letting them go. So let's stay here just for a few moments, feeling the rhythm of your breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Okay. So take one more breath, a deep, energizing breath this time, and fully exhale. And let's come back and we can start together. So hopefully you are feeling good after that, maybe a little bit more centered or calm. And I'd like this to be very participatory. So if you'd like to add anything to the chat about what that might have been like for you, please feel free. That helped. Good. Sometimes it's good to be able to have a centering moment before your next meeting. Excellent, great. So as you're typing, just a little background about how I came to be an advocate for mindful leadership. I've been fascinated by and practicing mindfulness for about 10 years, and I joke that I was a closet meditator when I worked in corporate. I've since learned that I wasn't the only one. At the time, I was never ashamed in any way to share my mindfulness practice, but I also didn't think it would help me, if that makes sense. I didn't tell my coworkers or my boss. I didn't want anyone to think I was weak or unable to make tough decisions, or God forbid they thought I was woo-woo, if you've ever heard that term. And the funny thing is that the more I practiced mindfulness, the more I felt like it was my secret weapon, and it helped me cope with the stresses on and off the job. So fast forward, I'm a leadership coach and a trainer, and I've had my business now for a little over 3 years. And over time, I've narrowed down what I consider essential and most relevant for busy professionals. And today I'll be sharing with you highlights from 6 what I call anchor practices, with the intention to leave all of us feeling a little bit better and more prepared to navigate these tough times. And if you should have questions throughout the call, Justin is on the, he's our techie guru on the back end, and he's going to be monitoring the chat box, and we'll make sure to leave time for questions as well. So thank you for that, Justin. All right, so I don't know about you, but humor is one of the things that's definitely helped me get through this crisis. I thoroughly appreciate the many online cartoons and jokes out there right now, and I'm seeking them out actually each day. They're kind of a bright spot for me. So I'd love to know a little bit more about you on the call. And if you haven't already, I invite you, go ahead and write in the chat, where you're calling in from, and maybe even where you're socially distancing from, what room of the house. So I'll give you a moment to do that. Hi, Atlanta. Florida, wonderful. Hi, Bobby. It was going really quick. I'm going to miss people. Miami, Florida. New York. Hello, Chicago. And Denver. Oh, great. Venezuela. Maine. Oh, thank you. This is great. Okay. All right, great, wonderful. It's so nice to have so many of you from different places. I just advanced the slide, and I just, I want to show you now the rarely seen follow-up slide to socially distanced Waldo. People always ask, where is Waldo? But they never bother to ask, how is he? So it's probably safe to say that we're all experiencing some form of what I call corona fatigue right now. And before we dive into our material, I'd like to just do a quick temperature check and see how we're all feeling right now. So this is a self-survey I've given out at the beginning of mindfulness workshops, and I've modified the top line to say during this crisis instead of during an average work week. So take a look at this list and think to yourself, which of these have you been feeling? And maybe which ones have you been feeling more intensely than others? Are there any here that you'd rate a full-on 10? While maybe some of the others are maybe lower, 5 or less on the intensity scale. And if you're open to it, I'd encourage you to share in the chat, like what are 1 or 2 that bubble up to the surface for you lately? What are 1 or 2 that you'd rate higher than the others? Worried about the future. Oh my goodness. Yep. Fearing the unknown. I'm seeing that. Worrying about the future. And distracted or unable to concentrate. Yes. Quick to judge people not wearing masks. I experienced that yesterday when I went to the supermarket. Yeah. Thank you for sharing these. Yeah. And it's interesting, what may have been a 5 or less a month ago, that may now feel like a 10. Like for example, fearing the unknown or worrying about the future. For me, at least, like those were lower on my list up until about a month ago. And as most of us know from neuroscience, the brain hates the unknown and it creates unnecessary anxiety. So let's just take a look at the top right for a moment, because a few people have also written distracted or unable to concentrate. Now that I've been doing this work for a while, I always still find that there's room for improvement. During this past month, I've gotten out of the habit of monotasking or focusing my attention on one thing or one person at a time. And I found that I've easily gotten distracted by what feels like this endless blend of work and home activity. Maybe you can relate as well. Just a quick story here. I think it's a little funny. My husband and I were watching this show Elementary recently, and if you haven't seen it, it's kind of like a modern day Sherlock Holmes. And we were about halfway through an episode, and I must have picked up my phone to look at a text or a news update, and sadly, I don't even remember doing it. And when I looked back at the TV, I realized I have no idea what's going on in the show. And I say to my husband, wait, I'm so confused. Both of those characters are dead? I'm going to need you to rewind a minute. And he just laughed and said, no, if you missed all that, I'm going to need to rewind more than a few minutes. So now this is just a silly example of how easy it is to get distracted. But if you'd like to help me feel better about that situation, you can go ahead and put a yes in the chat box if that's ever happened to you. It is interesting, though, how this crisis is surfacing different emotional states in us, maybe causing us to feel emotions that we might not have felt before. And it's important to acknowledge and name these when I can. What I like to call name it so you can tame it. All right. So here's our official agenda. I moved from New York City to Florida 2 years ago. So as a Florida resident, I feel now comfortable using a pool metaphor here. And if you were to envision a pool, we've got just enough time today to take a quick dip in the pool of mindfulness. And we'll be swimming in the part of the pool where we can comfortably stand, share insights, and maybe even enjoy a beverage, 6 feet apart, of course. But you can think of this part of the pool as representing individual mindfulness, what we do to build our own resilience, our own stress tolerance, and feel more grounded from within. The deeper end of the pool represents the emerging field of mindful leadership. And that's where individual mindfulness begins to radiate out and become part of a team or company's culture. Great conversation, just a different conversation. So I consider that chapter 2. All right, so before moving on, I just need to acknowledge something, and maybe you may have noticed this yourself, but mindfulness has gotten a ton of attention in press lately. And honestly, I have some conflicting emotions about it. While I'm happy to see a surge of new research plus endorsements from CEOs of large companies, I admit I'm both excited and a bit leery by the attention mindfulness is getting in popular culture. There's a risk of overexposure and misrepresentation. Okay, so I just want to give you one example of my conflicting emotions about this. All right. So when my sister-in-law sent me this picture recently, I thought, oh no, mindfulness has jumped the shark. If you've ever heard that term before, it's all downhill from here. Here's breathe with me, Barbie, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. While I appreciate that Barbie likes to meditate with her friends, I also feel like I have this protective instinct and I want to protect mindfulness from pop culture, but I'm obviously too late for that. Now, and if anyone on this call actually has real-time experience with this doll with their children, please, feel free to add a review in the chat box. I don't want to dismiss this toy offhand completely. But my message is that we should resist seeing mindfulness as a fleeting trend or a flavor of the month, but instead there are fundamental concepts and practices that can help us improve how we interact with the world and with each other. It's a sustainable way for us to be more resilient and grounded so we can meet the challenges of our modern times. And I, for one, I hope Barbie agrees with that. All right. So for those that know me, I love visuals, stories, and metaphors. So I'm going to start with all three. This picture reminds me of my dad for a couple of reasons. He was an engineer and an amateur car mechanic, emphasis on the word amateur, and he used to love going to car shows like this one. Vintage cars, classic sports cars, he loved them all. And when we went to these shows, other people wanted to talk about the exterior of the car, like the make, the model, the detailing. My dad, however, being a good engineer, all he wanted to do was talk about the engine. And day to day, whenever my dad was faced with a problem or a challenge, his go-to phrase was, let's take a look under the hood and see what the issue is. And this common phrase, let's take a look under the hood, has stuck with me, and through my adult life, I find meaning in it more and more places. For example, take the work that we do. Many of us on the call today work with leaders and organizations, and I'm pretty sure you'd agree. Many of them are very stressed, overwhelmed, anxious, depleted, and sadly, they're at risk of neglecting their physical, mental, and emotional health. And if they're not taking care of what's under the hood, they become extremely vulnerable to these influences, everything outside the car. And you can read that for yourself. And in many ways, we've become conditioned and rewarded for putting focus and energy on everything outside the car. But it's not just leaders in organizations that suffer this. It's us, too. As consultants, we may be even more vulnerable to anxiety, stress, and burnout because we often work alone. And even before COVID, we had to manage large amounts of uncertainty. So in many ways, mindfulness is about making a shift from being caught up or distracted by everything that's going on externally, and instead taking care of and honoring what's under the hood and making that a priority, because we can't bring our best selves to our clients if we're not taking care of our engines first. So I sort of took us for a scenic drive there. Thank you for taking the trip with me. I think Peter Drucker does a nice job of summing this all up. You cannot manage other people unless you manage yourself first. And in these very uncertain times, we literally and figuratively cannot save others unless we put our own mask on first. All right, so we're going to pause here and we're going to take a quick poll. Just curious, what is your level of familiarity right now with mindfulness and meditation? And if Justin, you could help with that and bring up the poll. Are you brand new? Are you somewhat familiar? Familiar or very familiar? Great. Okay, looks like we've got a mix. Okay, so maybe just a few more moments. Thank you. So, Justin, is the group able to see the results?
Yep, they should.
Okay, great. All right, so I think that that's perfect. We have now a sense of kind of, our level of familiarity on the call today, and it's great. We have a nice range. All right, so if we're able to go back to the slides. Perfect. Okay. All right. So let's zoom out here a bit. And I just want to share with you this definition from John Kabat-Zinn, and maybe some of you know him. He's the founder of MBSR, or Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, out of Massachusetts. And his definition has kind of stood the test of time. It's the awareness that emerges through paying attention on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally to things as they are. So to expand on this, mindfulness is really training our minds and our bodies to come back to the present moment over and over. It's building self-awareness of our triggers, noticing when we get caught up in stories or thoughts. Some of you have probably heard the term monkey mind. And noticing when we're highly reactive or operating from autopilot. All of this helps us to do two things: be less reactive and respond more skillfully to the challenges in our lives. So if mindfulness is the practice of being present and in the now, of developing moment-to-moment non-judgmental awareness, meditation is about setting aside, just setting aside time in your day to focus in a more formal way. Typically, we have an object of focus, like the breath or a mantra. So mindful practices, like some that I'll share today, typically include a blend of both. And some people may just do simple mindfulness exercises, like taking 3 quick breaths before answering your email, or noticing sounds and colors when you're out for a walk. And others may lean towards more formal meditation. There's really no one right way to practice. One noteworthy thing here, and we'll touch on this again later. Mindfulness has a compassion component. It's not just about bringing ourselves back to the present moment. It's the way in which we do that, gently, with compassion, not in a judgmental, harsh, or competitive way. And for many people, that is one of the hardest parts. This often goes against our nature in the U.S. In particular, and I always joke that if there was a competition in the United States for best mindfulness meditator, people would sign up for it. All right. So when we talk about mindfulness, it's also important to note what it is and what it's not. So first, and I wish this weren't true, but there is no immediacy to mindfulness. There's no one and done practice and poof, your stress disappears. The magic is in the continual practice and the commitment to doing a little bit each day. And while it's true that mindfulness has its roots in Buddhism, what we're talking about here are secular inclusive practices, meaning if you're human, you can benefit from them. And they're based in scientific research versus a spiritual base. And the third, it's a myth that mindfulness is a way to feel relaxed, check out, or escape reality. As I joked with one of my colleagues recently, this was not an excuse for him to hide in his office and zone out. All right, so let's take a quick look at the neuroscience. Yeah. And Justin, if you could be on deck to bring up this poll in a moment. But mindfulness is a way to train the mind to attain what's called optimum states. And that's really a state of relaxed alertness. So if you can think of times when you were feeling and operating at your best, when you were most at ease, focused, you're feeling creative, you were most likely in an optimum state. All right, so before I go on, let's pull up our second poll and let's see who already knows the answer to this question. It's been, yeah, there you go. There are changes in the brain of people who practice mindfulness regularly. Which of these is true? So if you could take a look at this, increased activity in amygdala, decreased activity in hippocampus, no change to prefrontal cortex, and then you can read the others on your own. Oh my goodness. Look at this group. I'll go into question 3. All right. All right, we'll give you just one more moment or two, and then we'll move on.
Did you want us to broadcast the results, Brenda?
No, I think that we're good. Okay. So a little spoiler alert here. If you answered yes to the third bullet, increased activity in the hippocampus, decreased activity in the amygdala, and increased access to the prefrontal cortex, you were correct. So you can give yourself a little pat on the back. All right, and whenever you're ready, Justin, we can go back to this slide. Thank you. So this is what's happening for people who practice mindfulness regularly. You've got increased activity in one area, decreased in the amygdala. Now, and the hippocampus is the part of our brain responsible for learning, memories, emotional regulation, and spatial orientation. A fun fact about the hippocampus that illustrates sort of how it works. There was an interesting study done with London cab drivers about 10 years ago, and they did brain scans and found their hippocampus to be larger than those of bus drivers. The bus drivers typically had the same route each day, while the cab drivers had to learn the entire city and create a mental map of all the streets. So that's a little fact about the hippocampus. The amygdala, as many of you know, is responsible for triggering our fight or flight response as a reaction to threat, whether or not that threat is real or perceived. And when the amygdala is overactive, it secretes the stress hormones adrenaline and cortisol. And that's why we become anxious and unable to think or speak clearly. And if you've ever experienced what's called an amygdala hijack, you know that that is not an optimum state. The good news here, and when those first two areas of the brain change, it helps us access the prefrontal cortex more quickly. And that's the logical decision-making part of our brain. So you can obviously see how this works together. The more quickly we can shift out of fight or flight mode, the less reactive we tend to be, and the easier it is to learn and focus and make clear, calm decisions. Well, this is also very important because, as we said earlier, the brain hates the unknown and it hates uncertainty. It loves to plan and predict, two things that are proving very difficult for all of us right now. And we just don't know what the rest of 2020 will bring. And I think it's safe to say that we're all experiencing a global stress response because of this. All right, so we're in exciting times right now. For anyone that is interested in the research, there's a wave of scientific research backing the efficacy of mindfulness, and here are some of the proven benefits. Great list, right? Like, who wouldn't want these benefits? And maybe you've experienced some of these yourself. Thinking about our current situation, however, I believe one bubbles up to the top as being most relevant and needed for us right now and for the long term. Curious if you agree with me. If you would, in the chat, if you take a look at this list, which one of these do you think is most needed right now? And or most relevant? I'll just give you a moment to think about that. Yeah. Empathy, increased resilience. Yeah. Emotional regulation. Great. As you're continuing to type, I think all of these benefits are wonderful. I think one, for at least for me, that bubbles up to the top that I think can help with all the others, resilience, the ability to recover from and adjust easily to misfortune or change. Because we're dealing with an unprecedented change right now, and building sustainable resilience can help us weather the storm a little bit more easily. But I also want to acknowledge what else you put in the chat here. I think empathy and emotional regulation as well, incredibly important during these times. All right, so these are the practices, these 6 anchor practices that I recommend as a foundation and a solid home base, I like to say. And what's nice about these practices is that they're not intended to add more work to our day. They just ask us to see our world differently and to interact with our world differently. So these 6, obviously, mindful breathing, know your stress triggers, trust your body, question your thoughts, more mono, less multi, and practice gratitude. And the reason some are highlighted, in the interest of time, I'm going to zoom in on 4 of the 6. And I want to leave you with a few tips in each category that I feel can be of most immediate benefit for everyone during this crisis. And I'll be sharing a summary after our call so you can learn more. But the intention behind these practices are twofold. To help us first regulate the central nervous system so we can create the right internal conditions, and 2, to create space between stimulus and response so we can respond more skillfully to challenges versus coming from a place of anxiety and fear. I've found that we can always build on these practices and add more, say longer meditation or yoga practices. But if you did nothing else, these are incredibly powerful on their own. All right, so we had a taste of this when we started today. We had a mindful breathing exercise. And if you were to pick up only one practice or continue with, if you're already doing this, if you were to pick up or continue with only one practice, I'd say this is the one. Mindful breathing is your main anchor and the starting point to all others. And as we're talking about this, I invite you to breathe just a little bit deeper than you normally would. So this practice can be formal or informal, meaning you can plan for it or not. Mindful breathing can, just a few times a day can help us regulate our nervous systems. It's like hitting the reset button on our stress response. And I don't know how many of you have experienced this, but when you start really paying attention to your breath, you might be surprised how different it feels to actually breathe more deeply, and how much of your day is spent taking really shallow or short breaths. And if that's something that you've ever noticed, feel free to include that in the chat as well. But anxiety loves shallow breathing. And when we breathe this way, it signals to the brain to activate our fight or flight. And deeper breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, and that allows us to feel more calm and focused. And the great news is that the more we do this, the more our bodies remember it, and we can reset faster. So our best friend here is the purposeful pause, and I give credit here to Janice Martirano. She's the founder of the Institute for Mindful Leadership. So similar to what we did at the start of our webinar, you can add purposeful pauses throughout your day, anywhere, anytime. Just 30 seconds to a minute or so helps us calm the central nervous system, and it's especially effective if we're triggered. Now, the second bullet is just an extended version of the pause, a few minutes or more. You typically plan for it and build it into your routine. All right, so at this point, I just want to ask a question. I'm curious. Who here feels like they've ever had a hard time just observing their thoughts or letting them go? And if that is ever something that you've experienced or felt, please put a yes in the chat box. If you've had a hard time just observing your thoughts or letting them go. Yeah, I think it's okay. Lots of yeses are coming in, yeah. It's kind of a universal experience, and it's totally normal. And for those that find it hard to let go of thoughts, I have two visuals which you might find helpful. So the first one, when doing this practice, I think of a house. I'm inside the house. The front door and the back door are open. Thoughts are free to come and go, but I don't invite them to sit down for tea. And eventually they get bored and they all leave either through the front or the back door. So that's one visual, because I think I'm a visual learner. The second visual is helpful in also cultivating non-judgment and self-compassion, quieting that inner voice that is harsh or self-critical. And this visual involves puppies, because I'm a dog person, so this one works for me. If you were to imagine a litter of puppies all gathered in a pen, and a few curious puppies keep trying to escape the pen. Now, in this case, you wouldn't react out of anger or impatience because they can't help themselves. They're just puppies. You'd probably gently and lovingly pick up each puppy and place it safely back in the pen. And this is what we do with mindful breathing over and over. We don't judge our thoughts or get overly critical. We just gently and compassionately bring ourselves back to our breath over and over. All right, so that's my second tip for visuals. Something to note here before going on to the next practice. The two examples on this slide, I consider an entry or a doorway to a longer meditation practice. But for many people who are not accustomed to meditation, or they're used to going 100 miles an hour, they're chronically busy, or they've experienced some kind of trauma, sitting still and breathing can be very dysregulating. And so I always think it's good to start small and then build. So that's why I consider this the anchor. Okay. So our next practice, trust your body. There are a lot of reminders out there to get enough physical exercise during the quarantine, and that's great. This practice, however, goes beyond just getting a good workout. It's all about first trusting the body to give us vital information, and then purposefully using the body to help us be more present, and then also regulate our moods and emotions. That's a lot. There is a lot of exciting research around what's called somatic intelligence, and I have a few resources in my handout as well. But all day, every day, the brain sends signals to the body, and the body sends signals to the brain. One influences the other. So let's do a quick exercise here that shows just how connected our bodies and minds are. And not to torture anybody, but I want you to think of an experience where you felt really embarrassed. Maybe you said or you did something, and then you instantly regretted it. Where do you feel that in your body? And if you're open to sharing, we'd love to see what you write in the chat. Yeah. I remember feeling a lot of those things when I accidentally reply all to an email years ago. Yeah. Yeah. For every emotion, we have thoughts about it, and then there's a corresponding somatic or a body experience, and that's what I'm reading here. And on a day-to-day basis, however, some of these sensations are easy to ignore. And I'm just going to share with you a quick story of what happens when you don't pay attention to your body's signals. About 15 years ago, I was working full-time with a capital F, taking classes, managing student loan, and my mom got very sick. And at the time, I really wasn't practicing mindfulness. So when I think back, it may have seemed on the outside that I was holding it all together, but in reality, I really let stress have the upper hand. And I kept soldiering on, but completely ignored the signals my body was sending me. Headaches, stomach pain, exhaustion, anxiety. And the signals got louder and louder, and I tried to override them with my mind, with things like, I'm fine, I can power through this, I'll be fine. Well, the truth is I really wasn't fine, and I was close to burnout. So I remember one day running my hands through my hair, and a few clumps just came out with my fingers, and I was horrified. And if that wasn't my wake-up call to listen to my body, I'm not sure what would be. Gladly, I've made a lot of changes since that time, and I'm very grateful. So maybe some of you on the call can relate to that story. I'm hoping you can't, but maybe some of you can. All right, so too late for spoiler alert. The body does not lie. A few tips here for tapping into the wisdom of the body. It's first about listening and paying attention to the sensations. When we notice what's happening in our body, especially if we're triggered, we're instantly in the present moment. So just simple noticing a few times a day can help us get out of our heads and be more present. I read an article recently by a woman who experienced burnout, and it revealed to me how disconnected our bodies and our minds have become for so many of us. I remember she was in IT and spent most of her day at the computer. And she said, I'm in my head so much, I feel sometimes like I'm a brain on a stick. And I laughed at that at the time, but that, there's so many of us working from home. I'm sure some of us can relate to feeling a little bit disconnected. Certainly I have the past 2 months from time to time. The third point on our slide here, if you've ever tried to think your way out of a bad mood or an anxious state, you know how hard that can be. It's sort of like telling somebody to just calm down, and that often has the opposite of effect. Our bodies have natural tendencies which contribute to feelings of well-being, which can help us feel more calm and centered. There are many somatic practices that can help improve mood and focus, and I'm going to leave you with just a few easy ones to remember. So first, wherever you are right now, notice your posture. How are you sitting? Now, I can't see anyone on this call, of course, but I'm curious, how many of you find that your back is slumping over your computer? Who would be willing to admit that? And if you are, please add that to the chat. Yeah. It's kind of what we call the iPhone hunch. Yep, guilty. So many of us are guilty of that. So the tip here is simple, but simple doesn't always mean easy. When you notice your back slumping, adjust to a more open, upright posture and breathe. This is a great remedy for the iPhone hunch. And the truth is, many of us spend countless hours in this semi-collapsed shape. But extended time in this posture just hinders our ability to breathe. And on a primal level, our body interprets this as a protective posture, and it sends signals to our brain of possible threat. So the body then responds by releasing stress hormones. And so when we're in this position, fear, anxiety, overwhelm, anger, it can all feel more intense. And when we practice a more open, and I'm doing it right now, I know you can't see me, but when we practice a more open, upright posture and breathe, this signals to the brain that we are okay. It also signals to those around us that we are present, confident, and receptive, which can just reinforce the same. All right, so one more tip here, and I'm going to ask that we explore a question. This time, I want you to think about a time or experience where you felt at your best, most confident, authentic self. You were at ease. You didn't feel self-conscious or anxious. You felt like, I got this. Now, I want you to think, how does your body feel when you're at your best? What are the sensations you feel? Maybe your legs feel grounded and solid. Maybe you feel like a lightness in your chest. And how would others describe what your body's doing? Maybe they can see you walking or talking with confidence. What comes up for you? And if you have anything that you'd like to add to the chat about this, about what comes up for you, please do that. I'd love to see your comments. But the body is an amazing tool. And when we can summon this feeling in particular and build a habit of remembering what it's like to be at our best, we have greater access to that state, and we begin to be able to tap into it when we need it most. So main takeaways here. Notice how your body responds. Listen to what it's telling you. And when you start to feel stressed or anxious, get out of your head and trust your body to help you self-regulate. All right, so our third practice, building the habit of questioning your thoughts. I like to say that the body is that friend in our life who's been by our side forever, that person we can count on to be totally honest when nobody else is. Our thoughts, on the other hand, are more like unreliable acquaintances. We like them, sort of, but they have a history of saying some sketchy or untrue things. We just don't trust them completely. So as humans, as many of you know, our default or autopilot mode prompts us to ruminate about the past, worry about the future, and distract ourselves in the present moment. And as we get lost in thought, our stories or narratives can stir up powerful emotions. So a quick story here to illustrate how our thoughts can lead us astray. I worked with a leader last year, and there had been a number of layoffs in her company, and she started to fear that she was next. And over time, all of her thoughts started to rally around and try to confirm this fear. For example, when her boss didn't respond promptly, she thought she was getting sidelined. And when she was called into any executive's office, she thought, well, okay, that must be it, I'm done. Well, long story short, she's still with the company and all is okay. And she's feeling better now, in large part because she started to see how much of a grip her thoughts had over her and how her perceived stress was causing her to suffer. And as the New Yorker reminds us, and it's a little small, so I'll read it, it turns out it wasn't the giant asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. It was stress about the giant asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. All right, so we can't stop the process of thinking, but we can make it work for us versus against us. Building awareness of our thoughts is the first step to reframing them. So at this point, I'd like everyone to bring to mind a thought, or maybe a recurring thought you've had over the past 2 months. One that maybe triggered you or made you feel scared or anxious. Maybe your thought was, I'm scared I won't find work again, or I have zero motivation, or if I don't get out of this house, I may blow a fuse. And if you're open to sharing one of those thoughts, please, I invite you to add that to the chat. And as you're thinking about that, just a reminder, our thoughts come and go like the weather, and they are not always true. The more we give them power, the more they can create suffering for us. And we want to interrupt this cycle as soon as we notice harmful thinking. So a simple way to do this, as you go about your day, pay attention to your thoughts And when you notice that a particular thought or judgment starts to loop and circle the drain, that's your cue to say, wait, what am I thinking? And then ask yourself, are these thoughts helpful or harmful? As you develop this practice, some follow-up questions might be, are these thoughts true? What assumptions or judgments am I making? What's another way to look at this situation? What would be a more empowering thought? And the most powerful reframe, this one's advanced, how can I show kindness and compassion to myself right now? How can I talk to myself like a supportive friend would? So the big takeaway here, our minds will believe whatever we tell it. And so it pays to question and curate our thoughts. The more we practice mindfulness, the easier it becomes to acknowledge our thoughts at a distance instead of getting swept up by them. And then we can reframe them to be more positive and empowering. All right, so to further this idea, let's look at perception versus reality. By noticing and acknowledging how things really are in the present moment, as opposed to how we would like things to be or how we think they should be, mindfulness can really help us clearly see our perceptions versus reality so we can more skillfully respond. And it's when we find ourselves in this yellow highlighted area, the gap, that's where suffering and frustration live. A work example for us might be, let's just say you partner with someone on a project, and then you quickly become disappointed in the quality of their work. And you worry that your relationship with the client is at risk. In our mind, we have thoughts and expectations of how we'd like them to be or how we think they should be performing, but that's not the reality. And we can't read their minds. We have ignored the situation for weeks now, and we find ourselves in the gap. Our frustration just gets worse until we choose to acknowledge what is and find a skillful, compassionate way to have a tough conversation with this person. Okay, and I found this concept can be very helpful both at work and at home. First, my mom is a perfect example, and just know that my mom has given me full permission to use her story. I've been helping her move out of her single-family home this year into a smaller, more maintenance-friendly home. She is a self-described collector, I'm using air quotes here, collector of things. I, on the other hand, might call her an organized hoarder. Now, I would like if this wasn't the case, but that's not my current reality. I love my mom, so I need to meet her where she is and create some space for myself before speaking so I don't say something I don't mean. So wish me luck. This will be a huge test of my mindfulness. All right, one more example here. All right, this is Gracie. She's our 3-year-old rescue dog. We've had her for a year now, and she had a really rough start in life. But for the first 6 months, she was terrified of everything. She had terrible separation anxiety. And after a while, my husband and I started to, get kind of discouraged, and we just wanted things to be all better for her. We thought, okay, you're safe now. There's nothing to be afraid of. But once we realized that she was on her timetable, not ours, we were able to let go of expectations and just be with her in the present moment. And the good news is that after a year, she's made real progress, but just in her time, not our time. All right, so you may have heard the saying, energy flows where attention goes. Or in other words, what we focus on tends to grow. And that brings us to the last practice we'll highlight today. Practice gratitude. And I'm going to ask us right now to think of one person or thing that you are incredibly grateful for, especially during this pandemic. Bring that to mind and really experience it for a moment. What is that like? Where do you feel that in your body? And add to the chat if there's something you want to share about gratitude or maybe something you're grateful for. But research confirms that when we shift our focus from what we see as wrong and instead pay attention to what's good in our lives by acknowledging what we're grateful for, we're literally rewiring our brains to be more stress resilient. Keeping a gratitude journal is a great way to start or end the day. but just an informal practice where we make a habit of noticing and acknowledging things day to day, no matter how small, that can help bring us psychological benefits. It's all about building the habit. All right, so in the spirit of building habits, what I've noticed over time, and zero judgment here, is that many of us know on a theoretical level that mindful practices could benefit us, but they struggle to put them into action. The truth is, our default habits are strong, and if we're not intentional about practicing something new, we can easily find ourselves in the left lane or the right lane in this comic, or from our earlier example, get swept up by everything that's outside the car. So if you've ever struggled putting mindfulness into practice, didn't know where to start, or beaten yourself up because you couldn't stick to a routine, I just want to reassure you that you don't need to meditate for hours on end or go to a week-long retreat to experience benefits. It's really about a mindset shift, supported by small steps. It's the small things we do every day that add up over time and start to really change the way we interact with the world. So I say keep it simple and focus on adding small changes to your day. All right, so as we round the track here, I just want to ask the group a question. We're slowly emerging from this pandemic. And months from now, what would you like to be able to say about how you handled it and yourself? I'm going to give you a moment to think about that. And if you're open to sharing, please do. I'm a survivor. Resilient, adaptive. This is great. Thank you so much for sharing. Oh, this is good. Wonderful. All right. Please don't stop what you're doing. I'm going to move on to the next slide to make sure to be mindful of our time. And as we close, I want to leave us all with something to reflect on. A consultant partner I respect tremendously shared this with me recently. She said, and I'm paraphrasing here just a little bit, she said, don't forget, as consultants, our clients often look to us as a source of outside strength and wisdom when the complexity of their world can feel daunting. We have an opportunity to bring fresh eyes, a fresh perspective, and valuable expertise to our clients every single day. I thought that was pretty profound, and it's something that some of us may forget along the way. So I'd also like to add that as we cultivate mindfulness, we have an opportunity to also bring a steady, reassuring presence to our clients. And just think, what impact would that have on your relationships and your work? So I'm giving a huge shout out for the important work that we all do, and a big thank you for joining today. I'm passionate about this topic, and I'm hoping it ignited or confirmed, some curiosity within you. And for those on the call today, I'll be sharing a handout that summarizes the practices and also a list of resources. And if you're interested in learning more about the coaching facilitation work I do, or the 8-week online series where we dig into each of the 6 practices, I'd encourage you to reach out. But either way, let's stay connected. I've really enjoyed my time here with you today.
All right. Thank you very much, Brenda. This is Justin with Harrisburg University, and I'm going to go ahead and practice some sharing of gratitude, see if we can use some of these techniques. And just thank you very much for this presentation. I know for myself it was, it was right on time, and I'm sure that everybody else is going to agree with that. Even some of the breathing exercises and getting started with some of these ideas were very helpful for me, and I plan to use those as I make my own way through here. I also want to thank Cheryl and TrainingPros for being wonderful partners with Harrisburg University and allowing us to provide timely and compelling webinar content such as the what we were able to put on today. If folks can stay with me for just a moment, I'm going to move us to a feedback layout. If you got a couple moments, please just let us know about your experience today and any ideas you might have for future topics. We do take your feedback very seriously, and we use it to improve future webinars, and we appreciate it. So I want to thank everybody for joining today. Hope everybody has a great rest of your Friday, a wonderful weekend, and we'll look for you on the next webinar. And take care.